Hello, good evening. I'm Eiman Munro. I'm the owner of Elementals. It's a company set up to transform science learning concepts into games and for offline and online play. A bit about myself. I'm a physics graduate, and I then moved, like a majority of science graduates, into the finance sector. And that I went into actuarial. For those of you who don't know, it's a very small profession. I worked in pensions, working with morbidity rates and working out your pension and transfer values if you work for a big corporation. So that was fun. And I moved from, that was actually quite a great experience, and I'm going to run through a little bit of a CV process just to tell you why I am where I am today. I moved from the private sector, actuarial field, into the voluntary sector, or controversially known as the third sector. And I learned about fundraising, social enterprises, the beneficiaries, and just supporting, creating projects to support social aims. Then from that, I moved on to the public sector and trained as a teacher, a physics-focused teacher. So trained for about a year, and it was there that I was introduced to games in the classroom. And it was actually my first week of observing a primary school teacher that I learnt how effective it was to use games in the classroom. And I'm talking about offline games, like card games. Because during a numeracy session, the teacher just pulled out a pack of cards, plainer than this, and the kids' faces are what stayed with me today. And that's what they literally just lit up, and they were so excited all together. I'd never seen it before. I got a little bit jealous because I wanted it in my science lessons. I thought I need to somehow replicate that in my lessons. And I thought, well, she's using a loop game. She was using a maths loop game. I thought, I'm going to try and make some science loop games. And I'm going to show you a picture of my first ever, so please don't laugh. This is my first ever card games that I created for my science lessons. And I focus on physics classes and physics topics because there weren't many physics teachers, and they'll make physics fun and help science teachers to turn their lessons into games. But these are used for plenaries mainly to summarize a topic. So I don't know if you know how loop game works. For those of you who don't, there are a series of cards with one question and one answer, and you can distribute it. You distribute it out to the class, to the students, and you start anywhere. The answer to the first question is on somebody else's card, so they all have to be engaged. They all have to pay attention. And then the next question is answered by somebody else, and so on, until the loop is complete by the last question is answered by the first person who started it. It's a simple mechanic, and it's purely used for plenaries mainly, or starters if you just want to have a bit of fun. And it summarizes various topics. So I got some funding to create that, and we this was 10 years ago, by the way. And I designed the logo and everything, apart from the free clip arts, which I got royalty free. And then in tandem to those two games, once they were published and distributed, I had to keep churning content because it's no good just waiting. You need to keep creating new games. But I had funding issues, so I had to think innovatively. I had to use a different mechanic. This is a Trump style game. You're probably all familiar with Top Trumps, owned by Winning Moves UK Limited. They have a licensing model, and so you can't actually use Top Trumps, but you can use the top half of Top Trumps or the Trump half of Top Trumps. And I used Top Careers and called it a Trump style game, and I got away with that. And this model uses sponsorship. And because it's how can I put it? This is a familiar mechanic. It's in the mainstream. So it was really easy to procure funding for because they already got it. The sponsors got it. They already understood what Top Trumps was. And we had, I think... So yeah, I'm laying it out. It's familiar, remove psychological barrier to play. This is from the kids' perspective, easy to explain. And as I mentioned, it was easier to procure funding. So from both sides, students and the sponsors, director of NPower loved it. He thought it was a great way to generate enthusiasm and interest of students in engineering and science-related careers. And they sponsored 2 career cards. So those were the career cards they sponsored. And all the content in the career cards, the icons we used, were all authorized by a specific umbrella organization that covered that career. So mechanical engineer was IMEC, Institute of Mechanical Engineering, and the other one, electrical engineer, with the equivalent umbrella organization. And so on. We got Vodafone sponsored telecoms engineer, British Airways airline pilot. We had Boots, it was my first sponsor. Once we got Boots, they all wanted to be on board. It was like keeping up with the Joneses. If it's good enough for Boots, it was good enough for them. So we had a huge interest, and this is only some of them. So this model helped create top careers in maths, science, and engineering. I haven't got it there for some reason. But now it's become a brand in its own right. Top Careers is a brand. We're doing Top Careers in construction and Top Careers in the motor industry. And they were sold in the Science Museum. 3 of them were sold in the Science Museum, which is great. Okay. That's all very well. I was happy with all of that, but as a teacher or as someone interested in replicating that enthusiasm, I wanted to do something else. What I didn't realize I was doing is I was creating adult-led games. And the toy industry has a lot of child-led games. Children use a lot of pester power to get their parents to buy them games. And I wanted to create that with educational concepts. So I looked at Magic the Gathering. Some of you guys probably know Magic the Gathering very well. I never got into Magic the Gathering, but I've got all the games, but I've never really got into the actual concept because it was complex. For me, for my level, it was complex. It has a huge following. Pokemon, I played that a few times. Again, huge following, but aimed at a younger audience than Magic the Gathering. So I looked at these 2 concepts and had a look, what is it that they're doing right? They're basically evergreen brands. They've lasted 25 years. They're still around. They've got millions of fans, $1 billion industry for each. I think Pokemon's worth 26 billion. Magic the Gathering, owned originally by Wizards of the Coast, Peter Adkinson. They had a startup back in 1990 and struggling. Richard Garfield comes along, submits Magic the Gathering, works with Peter. 3 months it took him to create. He's a maths wizard. Richard, he's one of the most famous games designers. You probably know him. And he designed Magic the Gathering, and then it just took off. This was back in 1990. Hasbro have since acquired it in 1999 for a paltry sum of 325 million. At the time, it's quite a lot. Nowadays, you know, it's worth billions now. I don't know exactly how, but it's still going strong. Still got a huge fan base. Some of you might be aware or into that. And Pokemon. Now, Pokemon's interesting because it's made in Japan, but it was infringing. We're talking about mechanics and gamification. It was actually infringing on one particular mechanic in Magic the Gathering. And so Wizards of the Coast acquired the rights to distribute Pokemon due to that one infringement. And Hasbro had both. I think it's now owned by Nintendo. I'm not sure. I can't keep up with all who's owning who, but I think Nintendo own Pokemon now. Big craze in the US once the cartoon was released, and this is what I was observing. What is it? What made it big? Cartoons, characters. Take note. And in fact, at one point, they were churning out so many Pokemon cards that some of the sports collectibles they just discontinued because they couldn't find printing presses to do the servers to print their cards. So that was amazing. There's like literally printing money for them. So I was looking at all of that and I thought, let's create a world. I'm turning my back on education a little bit now and focusing on using learning concepts. There is an underlying learning world. Create elements. And start with the basic building blocks of the universe. So this is a big experiment for me because it's the first time I'm literally out of my comfort zone. I'm into the toy and games industry for the first time, and we launched an MVP, as you call it, and in Toy Fair last year, and we just tested it. We just trialed it out, and it was great. So the concept is elements, capture, combat, and combine, an adventure of monolithic proportions. Okay. So the underlying theme is to merge education with the toy and games market, and this time it's aimed at both boys and girls. An LCG is a living card game. It's not a CCG like Pokemon. Pokemon have a gambling element to it. With this, you can quite easily create a CCG, a collectible card game for elements, because you've got rares, certain gold, silver, you've got diamond, if you add pressure to carbon. There's a natural rarity to it, but it's not great to create another CCG. I tested it with the Boardgamegeek market. They didn't like that idea, so I just focus on an LCG, living card game, which means you get all the elements in one go. So using the ingredients of the toy industry, we created the characters, the stories, and there is collectibles, games, and added the colour. So here are some of the endearing characters, a couple of them. And I work with Josh. Josh Capel is my co-designer. He's not just an artist, he's also a games designer, and he has won awards for his games design. He's done a few for himself. And so there's some notations for, the period groups in the periodic table. So this is all the madness part, but there is a reason for it all. And a series of battles. This is the first MVP we launched. Rock, paper, scissors is the mechanic for this one. When I did my research, I had a look at because I was looking at it from a games, from the toy industry perspective, rather than just purely educational. Which property to use. So I picked out states, because every single element has a state, solid, liquid, or gas. And we use rock, paper, scissors. Solid splashes liquid, liquid disperses gas, gas engulfs solid. We started aiming at the 5-year-olds upwards. And also we had to build the relationship between the three states, which is the heating and the cooling element side. And we just played it with kids. We went to the UK Games Expo. We just played it as a game, not as an educational game, because I'm using the techniques that the toy and games, they don't tell you. As a teacher, you tell kids, you're going to learn A, B, and C. I did not want to create another adult-led product. I wanted to create a child-led product. So I did not tell them that they were going to learn A, B, and C. I let them decide if they're going to learn A, B, and C their own way. Okay, and so our next stage is we got more battles coming. The next one's the technique we're using for the next one is a 10-pin bowling to demonstrate the strengths of elements. New stories. I've had to be an author. I have to create my own stories. So we've got series now, actually. We've got the first synopsis that's out. A first novel. I don't know if you were aware of Beast Quest, Sea Quest. It's that thickness, 30,000 words. It's not very long, but it's an adventure, and there is a quest. So I've got the first draft of the first chapter with me, if anyone's interested. We've got more characters, because that's what kids were asking. They wanted more. They just want to keep collecting. An online platform that we're developing now, and an app for each battle. So we've got the first simple app. And for those of you who aren't familiar with toy, with the hobby market, I would just advise you just have a look and read and use some of the mechanics that are already out there that work with kids. That's how that's my angle. And go to UK Games Expo. It's happening. Next one's in May, or the biggest one, Germany, Essen, Spiel. There's another huge one in Indianapolis. It's called Gen Con. And I just think that the education market should just get out of their education zone and look at what works and what the toy and games industry are doing and what kids are asking for. Because that is where I think really the educational concept should be focusing on. Both. There's no harm in having both, but there isn't enough educational concepts that are child-led. And that's what I wanted to shout about. Okay. I think that's all. Yeah. Just checking.
Okay. Anyone have any questions? Tom.
Cheers. Do you envision this as being a game that like teachers could use in the classroom, or are you envisioning this as something that is played kind of extracurricular type thing? Because those are two very different markets, different requirements, etc. Well, I just wondered where you think of placing this.
Creating a child-led game means it has to be outside the classroom. So, although with any game you can create a lesson plan and apply it into the classroom, but I think it's the psychological element I want to get away with, the educational side, because that gets, unfortunately, seen as boring. Unfortunately, that's the way it is currently. So I'm looking at it outside the classroom in the toy and games market specifically.
Have you got to test it with a group of children in the classroom though? Because I can see a teacher would see that in the shop and probably take it into their classroom. Have you seen it in action?
Let me think. I have mainly seen it played in Games Expo, where parents would leave their kids with us, and they'd go off, and kids would just play games. But I have had teachers buy it. We went to an SEN show, Special Educational Needs, and teachers just came. And as soon as I explained, for some teachers, as soon as I explained it to them, they bought it. But I haven't seen it in the classroom because I've been focusing mainly in the toy and games industry, trying to get away from. There are obviously some of the projects I do have been tested in the classroom, but this concept, Elements, is I'm avoiding the classroom for a very good reason.
What's your view of like the amount of competition for this kind of game? So you're talking about the toy and kind of sort of board game market, which is obviously quite different to what's normally discussed here. It's certainly outside, I think, probably a lot of people's expertise here. But what's your view on kind of like this kind of game? Is there lots of competition? Because we hear about quite a lot of competing digital products. But what about sort of non-digital games like this?
Okay, so Tom's question is, in the board and card game market, is there a lot of competition with this kind of product?
Yes, there is a lot of competition for games, as you know, but for games with educational science themes, I haven't seen that many personally. There are periodic table card games. There's one that failed Kickstarter last year. And there's one in Australia, but what they don't do, I mean, what they are trying to do is create one game for the whole periodic table, and you just can't do that. So what we've done is create a series of battles to depict certain properties, certain mechanics, certain periods, and that's more fun because kids start collecting the decks. So the first game is a starter deck, two-player game, state mode, 118 elements, easy, done. Next one, alloy mode, focus on the alloys, show kids how you can reinforce different alloys to. You just need a little bit of, for example, you've got iron and a little bit of carbon. You create steel. Add a little bit of chromium, you've got stainless steel. And that's a shiny card, and automatically it's almost natural too. So that's the alloys, and then you've got Dazzle Mode. Kids will start making gems, sapphire. You can go on and on and on. Zap Mode, depicting electrical properties. Magneto Mode, magnetic energy. I can go on. But things like that. I haven't seen it in series. I've seen it whole game, but not in a series.
How, if you can share, how well are these selling, and how are you selling them? It sounds like you're distributing direct. Have you looked at publishing them through others, or interested in the economics of it?
It's currently an experiment. We sold a third of our stock. We had 1,000 units. Sorry, my throat is dry. Sorry. We sold. We had 1,000 units printed. We're just experimenting, and we're pivoting like we've never pivoted before. That's where we're at. So we're literally taking whatever they say, whatever we see kids do, we'll adapt it. So now kids want something more complicated. They want more characters. We have to keep feeding that. And yeah, I have thought about all of those things, and that's what we're working on. There's the London Book Fair's coming up, so I'm looking to get the books published in partnership with a publisher.
Are you looking to go to Kickstarter now that you've had the product and it's shifted a few units and it's had a bit of history to it? I know you mentioned that failed Kickstarter, but do you see that as a viable form of funding for this? Because you've gone through sponsors and other things, and you have to kind of bend the game to fit into what's going to be doable for sponsorship. But do you think you can go Kickstarter for like the next stage into a bigger project? Or
question is, do you see Kickstarter as a viable model for raising funding for this kind of game?
Yes, the answer to that, yes. Kickstarter, but I need a bigger following. So Boardgamegeek is a great place to, you know it. Yeah. Getting to know the people. Idle Michael, Rob Harris, these are the people to build the fan base, and I'm still trying to build the fan base for it to realistically go into Kickstarter and hopefully be successful. I'd rather go into Kickstarter and get the whole funds. So it's just about building the fan base now.
Hi, I was just wondering, I think there's, looking at card games, there seems to be kind of a trend of there being a lot more digital card games kind of coming out at the moment. And I was wondering if you felt that it being a tactile experience had any advantages educationally, and what they might be.
I think there's always something about holding something in your hand and playing as a group rather than in front of a screen. I do think, but it's just another tool. It's a complementary tool. It's not an alternative. It's not, everything can be used in the right way. So it's just another complementary tool. That's how I see it.
I would say trying to bridge this, the education and games market is quite a difficult one. If you look at the Moshi Monster approach, because we had a little startup where we had 350,000 users in our 16-week pilot at TupPup that we flipped to for some equity, and it bought them users that didn't really do anything for them in education, and they've never really tried to go into that space. And their real focus has been on licensing. And I think one of my questions would be, is this a licensing play? And would you be better off going to someone like Chris Taylor, who's one of the investors in Night Zookeeper, and he's got his own games development company out in West London, where all they do is develop games and license them in at a really high level with Mattel and with people like that. I think Chris sold Polly Pocket to Mattel for about $60 million. In fact, I think he sold to them twice because they didn't actually buy the IP the first time, because their very expensive due diligence lawyers were sort of idiots. But that's what you tend to find with most due diligence lawyers who work in the tech sector. And again, it's a similar thing that we've seen with Night Zookeeper, that it's a really difficult play to play both those markets. Oddly enough, I was thinking actually for your product, one of the definable markets you could chase could be the US homeschooling market. Except, given that it's a science-based product and homeschooling is largely driven by religious fundamentalists in America, it might not exactly work too well. But there are definable markets like that you could look at. And also toy companies. There was one in Australia who acquired a big toy company who sold both into the retail and particularly into the education sector. I think it was something like Futurama. It was owned by a company called ABC Learning, who for a period were the fastest growing childcare company in the world before they went tits up for about $3 billion. But there are a few specialist distribution companies around, and I think maybe if you tried to source those and discuss licensing deals with them, that might be better than trying to do it, all by yourself, because it's a very heavy lifting job. And honestly, I don't know how many times I've been to the London Book Fair. It's nice. You meet lots of sort of, very, very exciting publishers, but don't expect you'll do a deal. You'll be dead, or you'll be retired before it'll happen.
I think that was more advice than a question, wasn't it? I think you two should get together after this and have a chat. I think you had a question.
Yes, I have a question. So I like your philosophy of student-led games. We follow we call ourselves, I work with Kahoot, and we do user-centered design, and for us that's student-led design. But a difference for us designing a logon platform for a bank to a student game is resistance is good for education. So designing good resistance. And I was wondering, how do you, when you're dealing with the inquiries or the suggestions from the students, you don't give them what they're asking for. So do you have a process for kind of understanding what they want and then actually applying a good educational process on top of that?
So you ask me, do I ask students or kids what they want?
Well, you said that they come and ask for things.
Okay, when we played at UK Games Expo, the older groups, it was a little easy for them. So they wanted a little bit more. I mean, we had it tested with Imagination Gaming in I think they're up in North. I'm not sure exactly, but they trialed it with all school settings too, and their feedback was parents were saying, can you add a complexity? I mean, the kids give feedback, either they like it or they don't. That's the feedback we get from kids. So we just have to assume a lot of the time, and one of the is the lack of complexity. Needs another level. We need to add a little bit more strategy, that sort of thing. So it's very hard to get feedback because kids don't really know what they want. They either like it or they don't. And I like focus groups, but for me, focus groups just tell you if they work or not. It's like a this or that. Asking you present them something, and that's great if they take it on board. And you can't please all children. I think it was said earlier. You can't. There's always going to be a group demographics they're not going to like it, and some that they do. Rave on. Sorry, Tony.
Okay, Tony, you are the last question, then we really have to go.
You mentioned some of the science that was behind what you were doing. I wonder if you've evaluated the transferability of the learning. Do they actually learn the science, is the first question. The second thing, does it matter?
I knew someone's going to ask me that, because that is an area that does it matter? What we're trying to do is just transform the periodic table, merge science fiction with science fact, and then the teachers can use any part of it that they like. Eventually, once we think, hopefully it's all the rage, as a tool in the class. I personally just let the kids decide if they're learning or not. It's much more fun for them. Rather than, I've seen some parents, they give them a pack of cards and they'll tell them, no, you're meant to play it like this, and it gets very boring for the players. They want to do it their own way, and that's part of learning. That is part of science. That's how we discovered science. We discovered it our own way. We didn't have anyone telling us any, and that's what I'm trying to replicate in a fun way, hopefully.
Okay, I think that's all we've got time for now, but we can continue this conversation on Twitter and in the pub. I'd just like to thank our three speakers this evening, Wayne Holmes from Zondal, Jamie Brooker from Kahoot, and Eiman Munro from Elementals. Is that what it's called? Elementals? Lots of good resources on the Twitter feed from tonight if you look at the Leg Up hashtag. Thank you again to Leon and Learn for Life TV for running the live stream, which will all go up on our YouTube channel in the next couple of days. It is our 3rd birthday on the 16th of April, and we're having a party at Google Campus with some great speakers, including Dr. Joe Twist from Yuki. Who else is speaking? Ben Watley from Memrise. Cat on Your Head. Yes, we're playing a game called Cat on Your Head, which is a game about how to make better games. And we'll be attempting to live stream that as well, I think, possibly with Leon's GoPro camera, which will be an interesting experiment. Please come if you can. Free drinks, sponsored by Mr. Motormouth Richard Taylor over there. Thank you very much for that. And yeah, so we're looking forward to seeing you there. And at our what's our next event after that?
The next event after that is planning to be one about games in the cultural sector, but that's providing I can put it together. So we're going to head out from here to the Perseverance, which is just out of the door, and turn left and walk about 2 or 3 minutes. Yep.
One more thing before we go. I am looking for people in the community to curate events in future. We'd like you to get more involved with Leg Up. So if you are interested in doing that, come and talk to us in the pub. And thank you all for coming. Thank you to everyone on the live stream, and we will see you next month.